I think this is a good time to get more into the interaction between genetics and environment. And another thing that you wrote about in Blueprint that I found extraordinarily unintuitive, that it would be very worthwhile to unpack, is that the environment makes siblings reared in the same family just as different as those raised in different families. And this on the surface doesn't seem like it would make sense at all. So I wanted to ask if we could get into detail on this.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's another one of those unintuitive sorts of findings. It's certainly not something your grandmother would have told you. And quantitative genetics began by trying to separate nature and nurture in familial resemblance. That's why you have adoption studies and twin studies. But what we found is that familial resemblance, what runs in families for reasons of DNA. It's all due to nature. So with weight, you remember the example with the adoption studies, for example, kids resemble their parents, but only if they share genes. So adoptive parents and adopted kids correlate 0 for weight. Birth parents and their adopted away kids correlate just as much as parents and offspring who live together in the same family. So that suggests that genetics accounts for family resemblance. But the environment's important because heritabilities aren't 100%, they're 50% on average. So what is that environmental, that is non-genetic influence? It's not nurture. It's not systematic effects of the family environment. It's what we called in our paper in 1981, non-shared environment. It's not this shared nurture, the effect of growing up with people and having parents, the same parents, for example. Whatever it is, the environment's making two kids in the same family no more similar than just kids at random in the population. So then the question is, well, what are those influences? But do you see what I mean, though, that the environmental influences aren't the ones we always thought were important? That is, shared family environments, the shared effects of parents. Now, it's important to distinguish here between events and effects, influences. So divorce, for example, two kids growing up in a same family, if their parents get divorced, that event is shared by them. But we know from hundreds of studies that the effect of divorce on kids in a family can be very different. In fact, it often is very different. So we're talking about the effects of environment make two kids in a same family different, not similar.
And I'm wondering if this relates back to the story of your granddaughter and her appreciation for words and how they have a very different effect on her than they do on your other grandchildren. Is the reason that the effect on of divorce on kids in a family is very different, even if the event itself is the same, is because the children themselves have different genes, and the genes then result in their interacting with the events and being shaped by them very differently?
Yeah, exactly right. That's one of the most, I think, exciting findings in behavioral genetics, again, because it's counterintuitive. Almost all of the
Yeah,
environmental
it does
measures.
though. It does raise a question though, that do twins respond to divorce the same way? Identical twins.
Yeah, but they don't because it's not 100% heritable. But in fact, identical twins respond more similar to the divorce than do fraternal twins. So, um, so this is part of this huge area called the nature of nurture. And from the 1980s, I accidentally put an environmental measure, a parenting measure, into our behavioral genetic design. And I found it's showing significant genetic influence. And it was a mistake, I thought, but then I started thinking about it and said, the environments that we use in psychology are not measures of the environment out there independent of us. Like the most widely used measures are like life events measures, for example. And the top items there are things like having financial problems, getting in conflicts with people, having trouble with romantic relationships. Well, this is not the environment out there independent of us. This is the environment that we help create. And that's where the genetics comes in, because all behavior is heritable. And so our response to the environment, our interaction with the environment, also shows genetic influence. So the bottom line is that if you take all the measures we use in the environmental measures that have been studied, like parenting measures, life events, social support, all these measures, on average, they're 25% heritable. Not 50% like behavior, but significantly and substantially due to genetic influences. So that's the nature of nurture. And that is partly responsible for why, when you correlate something like parenting with kids' outcomes, it's almost hard to resist the temptation to interpret that correlation causally. Even though we know correlation does not imply causation, it's hard to say. Parents who read a lot to their kids have kids who read better when they go to school. So you say, well, sure, that's straight environment. But actually, it's substantially due to genetic factors. Because who are the parents that read a lot? Who are the kids who like to read? Which families have books in their home? It's an interesting thing that when I first came to England 30 years ago, the government at that time wanted to improve kids' reading ability. And so they knew there's a correlation between books in the home and how well kids read when they get to school. So they really were going to go out and just deliver a lot of books to homes. Maybe that would have helped, but it assumes that correlation is all environmental, but it's clearly not. DNA doesn't make books go on the shelves in a house, but parents do. And which parents have a lot of books in their house? And then because their kids are genetically related to them, those kids are going to be more likely to like to read. Increasingly, I think it's appetite as well as aptitude. It isn't just neural hardwiring to make you like to read. It's more a matter of what you like to do. And you tend to like to do things you're good at. And so you get into this virtuous cycle of gene environment correlation, where you then read more and more and get better at it, and you hang out with people who are kind of verbally oriented. So that's the nature of nurture, which I think is related to the question you started here.